All right, ladies and gentlemen. So a big question we're going to look at as we go forward in this last section of period 3 is imperialism. And why does Europe decide to take over all different parts of the world? We're going to start in Africa, move to Asia after that, and try to discuss, just what Europe's thinking here and why they're thinking it. Going forward, here's our little map. So Europe check out. We can see Africa in 1870 versus Africa in 1914. We can see how the whole thing has been carved up, chewed up, changed around a little bit, and that very few areas stay independent throughout the history of Africa. The only few areas, so it'd be Ethiopia right here, okay, Liberia over here, and a few little areas in West Africa that actually stay as independent countries. Early on, we saw a lot of our colonial areas kind of just worked right along the edge, trading towns, that kind of stuff, really, and see who had the influences there as of 1870. Whereas in the 44-year period between 44-year period between 1870 and 1914, we see Africa carved up by all these different European countries, so the British, the French, the Spanish, etc., etc., etc. Now, we talk about Slovenian class, but there's going to be a big difference between, I'll move myself up there we go, between colonialism and imperialism. We talked about colonialism back in period 1, the idea where Europe started expanding and getting involved in other areas. Well, the colonies they used to have back then were more like trading colonies and slave trade colonies. Remember, slavery is illegal. Okay, it's been illegal for a while in the European countries. So Britain was the last country to have slavery in 1833. The slave trade being made illegal in the early 19th century. But these are never permanent settlements. They would put trading posts there. They would put trading posts and companies that ran trading areas on the coast of Africa, whether you're the Portuguese, or the French, or the British, or whoever. There was no direct control. There was no they would raise the flag, but they wouldn't have, direct government control. Imperialism, on the other hand, is going to be that direct control by the government, possibly other leaders. Now, you're not going to see slavery, but it's going to be still, okay? But it's direct government control. So now the mother country, whether it be Belgium or Europe or France or Britain or whoever, will have direct control, possibly directly or through other leaders in that colony. And they're going to put a lot more money into it, building roads and bridges and railroads and harbors, all that kind of thing. Those things to get the natural resources they need to fuel their second industrial revolution. So things like rubber for bicycle and car tires and that kind of stuff. Things like ivory for, piano keys, gold, and all those other kind of things are needed to keep fueling that industrial spirit, and it's going to make a lot of changes to the people that already live there. And so that's where we're going to see this whole imperialism thing move on. Now, industrialization of material goods is a big part of it. So in order to make this quote here from Chamberlain, the one of the prime ministers or one of the MPs in Britain at the time, one of the things Neville Chamberlain said, we need to make Britain be a great self-sustaining empire, almost kind of like mercantilism to a degree. Because the European industry needed those raw materials. They needed the stuff, right, to make stuff from. They figured out that crap. The United States is this giant, big old country, and they have all these natural resources. And they're now going to become the leaders in industrial production. And what Europe's really lacking is natural resources. They've used them all up, chewed them all up, and it's not there. So things like iron and rubber, cotton, jute, which can make rope, that kind of stuff, they need that stuff, okay? They need those primers, those raw materials. And, they also need markets to send their stuff back. So we have that great self-sustaining empire. Now, the big question is why? And believe it or not, the why comes down to the Ottoman Empire, okay? The group that had, in theory, won, had in some cases won, those things, those wars, the Crimean War, but they have problems. So they have a lot of poor leaders. So one of the things that the problem of Ottoman Empire is that, they have very poor leaders. They have a sultan who's a political leader. They have a big, huge bureaucracy, and it's very, very decentralized. Okay, they have a leader, but the local area government controls have all that kind of stuff going on. And the economic problems, they aren't, there's a lot of unemployment, a lot of problem with trade, competition in the United States. They're even less industrialized than than Russia is. But they're also blocking the path to Africa. If you think about the path from Europe to Africa, the Ottoman Empire is kind of in the way, and they also control a lot of that northern territory. They start getting, and that's what Europe wants. They want to get in that territory so they can get access to those raw materials. But the issues you have that Ottoman Empire in the way. Well, Ottomans, as they're getting weaker and weaker and weaker as the 19th century goes on, they can't keep a hold of their territories. The wars with Russia, all that kind of stuff, get involved. And Britain and France and stuff start moving in to Africa. And even though they say we don't have colonies, they really do. The Ottomans aren't strong enough to kick them out because they know they can't fight them. War almost erupts, but it doesn't really go down. Where eventually they signed a treaty in Berlin that say, as European powers, we're not going to fight a war, right, in Africa. But a lot of things are happier. So early on, there's a couple of famous names: Dr. Livingstone, Lord Stanley, who's a famous explorer. Livingstone was a British explorer, missionary, and one of the first Europeans to explore into the middle of Africa. Instead, they stayed on the coast before. Now they're going into sub-Saharan Africa. You did a lot of things like, humanitarian work, mission work, all those kind of things, all throughout, Central Africa, Congo, especially those kind of areas. In the 1840s, they thought he was lost. He just kind of disappeared, and there are a lot of new ideas and stuff about where he went. Kind of this big mystery type story. And eventually, H.M. Stanley, who was a kind of a famous explorer, adventure type guy, starts going through Africa and stuff and trying to find Livingstone. And Stanley's there to tromp through, and he eventually comes across him in a village. Says, "Dr. Livingstone," I presume, this very famous quote he has. But what's kind of cool about it is that as this whole story is blown up, the newspapers, the mass media of the time make this a huge deal. And they make Africa sound like this really cool, exotic, beautiful place, right? With jungles and strange people and strange animals, all that kind of stuff. And also people are like, ooh, I kind of want to check this out for myself. And all of a sudden people start thinking like, hey, we can do this. And government starts thinking, hey, we can do this. And we start getting an idea of ability over Africa. Stanley later on works with Belgium, the king, King Leopold II, to take over the Congo for all of Belgium. Now, we're going to show you some examples here about how different colonial systems worked in Africa, and then we'll be discussing these in class as we go on here. But Egypt was the first example. Now, Britain had controlled Egypt for a long, long time. Napoleon had fought wars and there and stuff against the British. And essentially, it was a semi-autonomous state where they were still in Egypt, but Britain still kind of controlled. That makes sense. The Khedives, the Muslim rulers, they really wanted to modernize Egypt. They wanted, all this money and stuff. They need all this new industry and stuff. They needed money because they didn't have the bankroll to do it. Well, who has a bankroll? Britain has a bankroll. The thing is that when they started getting money from Britain, they also had to then be like, Britain's like guy. They had to make sure they were there and working with Britain all the time. And if they went against Britain, the money gets cut off. And so they become dependent on Britain for that cash. And so we start seeing projects like Suez Canal, all those kind of things happen. The open trade, funded by the British and the French, but Egypt kind of owes it to them because they give them the money. Well, eventually this thing starts going south, and Egypt tries revolting in 1883. But Britain landed a bunch of soldiers with new modern military stuff and weapons and machine guns, all those kind of things, and they take over. They keep a huge military garrison there. They try to take direct control of the military, put a big Navy base in Alexandria, put troops in Cairo, all over the place. And they say, okay, listen, okay, you're still Egypt, right? We're going to create taxes for the local population. And so then they start, start pouring tax on people, which are all collected by the locals and sent up to the British. They put a law of what you can do. Like they said, you know what? Egyptian cotton is very, very popular. They wanted the cotton for their textile factories. But they chose to say you could grow the cotton, but you can't manufacture it. And so you start seeing all those things happen. And as wages and income start going down and people start losing more money, more Egyptian nationalism starts taking place. At the same time, more British nationalism is taking place because people are getting rich in Britain off of all the Egyptian cotton, those kind of things. And Egypt really becomes a model for British imperialism, for imperialism in general, as you see the British rulers working through the local rulers, controlling the local population and making tons of bank off them because of the raw materials. It becomes the model for imperialism. And so all these different countries want to get in on the deal. So, everybody from Portugal and Spain and France and Belgium and everybody wants to get in here and start getting places. So they start moving themselves into Africa. And through different ways. They do direct control, indirect control. So direct control would be, okay, I'm going to plant my flag here and I'll own this. Indirect control is working through the locals, using diplomacy, using superior force, like armies, those kind of deals. And it almost leads to war in 1878, with the leaders finally said, hey, this is kind of dumb. We really can't afford to fight a war right now. Let's hold off. The way they figure out is they'll meet in Berlin in 1884, 1845. And Bismarck sits them all down and says, listen, let's figure this out. And they sit down called the Scramble for Africa. They sit down. They basically carve out all of the pieces of Africa that each country is going to have. And so they kind of carve out a little piece of Africa so they could have them. So now you start seeing different chunks of Africa have different rulers. So North Africa, a lot of questions too about kind of how things are going to work. North Africa had that great Mediterranean coastline on it, and a lot of economic pressure happening here. And so a lot of deals between different countries and local populations. A lot of money was spent to build mines and harbors and farms, those kind of things to help Europe out. So different places kind of walk in and start taking over areas. So Great Britain obviously has Egypt, whereas France kind of walked in, took over Algeria and Tunisia, and Italy got Libya. And start using the economic power to kind of control those countries. Whereas in other areas, like in Belgium, they kind of end up walking in and use the idea of a humanizing or Christianizing mission to take over the Congo. So King Leopold II, this guy right here, creates the International Africa Association. And he basically uses Major Morton Stanley, that hero explorer type guy, to go to Congo and gain land. And they use treaties with the local population. So these guys are signing a treaty saying, we're going to work with you, blah, 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 blah. Really, when they were signing this treaty, they were just giving the land over to King Leopold in the European sense. And so it became essentially not a Belgian colony, but a personal colony for King Leopold in his name alone. And so then a lot of times the military, and King Leopold's rule, went through and explored all the native populations. They did torture and slavery and stuff, mutilation, all those other problems to get raw materials back to Belgium. The biggest ones being ivory, diamonds, and rubber. And diamonds are a big thing because even today, De Beers, the biggest diamond company in the world, is located, you guessed it, in Belgium, ladies and gentlemen. And it came from that whole thing. Eventually, the crimes in Belgium get exposed, where you start seeing what happens. And I'm going to move this picture over a little bit. We can see what happened in Belgium, where people are being whipped and chained, and people are being taken off in chains, those kind of things. And almost half this Congolese population is wiped out. And what they would do is they would use the threat of losing a hand. And so you had to go out every day, every month, and collect a certain amount of rubber from the rubber trees or diamonds, where it might be. And if you did not bring enough of that stuff back, they would lose a hand. Now, obviously, as a lot of people are farmers, they lost a hand. That is not a good day. And so they would have that problem happen. Now, eventually, when the crimes get exposed, published in a paper, Leopold has to give the colony up to Belgium, but they're going to stay a Belgium colony for quite a while until they can finally make a change in how things work in this place. And that's an example of Belgium. We'll talk more about Belgium in class, get a little more detail on it, and my computer's going crazy here. But I just kind of know about Belgium. Now, Britain does their own things. Now, Britain has their own problems in Sudan, where they want to control Sudan. Now, Sudan is just south of Egypt and is a big chunk of desert and stuff. But there was an area that Britain had ruled for a long time. And so eventually there were revolutions between the people that were living there. And so as these tribesmen, killed 28 Britons in a revolt, General Horatio Kitchener uses those machine guns, that powerful weapons that they had developed to kill 11,000 people. And so Sudan became a big kind of touching point for imperialism for Britain. And in the Fashoda incident, where Britain and France almost go to war over Sudan. They're fighting over access to this area so much, they almost go to war. And it's kind of one of France's ways of covering over the Dreyfus incident. Kind of Dreyfus incident becomes part of that, in terms of where comes up. Now, one of Britain's big goals was to rule Africa basically from Cape to Cairo. So they had Cairo up here in northern Africa. They wanted to get control of the southern Africa, actually run a railroad all the way down the middle so they could transport goods back and forth. South Africa, like Belgium, was also very much in demand. They had all of the great minerals that everybody needed. So gold and silver and diamonds and copper, all kinds of farms and rubber, all these different things. Now, besides the local African populations that were already there, it also was ruled by Boers. Now, Boers were Dutch farmers who had settled in Africa very early, in the 14, 15, 1600s. And they spoke a language called Afrikaans. It was a kind of a version of Dutch, if you will. Well, when diamonds got discovered, it became a whole big deal, right? And so Britain tries moving in and taking over this area as they kind of took over. And so they call, the Boers that lived there call themselves the Orange Free State, kind of off of Holland and Transvaal. Well, after the British involve in and start fighting a war. You have the two Boer Wars, the first and the second Boer War, to kind of make those happen. And it's all kind of started trying to get Germany involved with what's called a Kruger Telegram, where Germany sends telegram saying, Britain's that the Boers are going to work with Germans, so then the British invade, and so on and so forth. And they use in this Boer War, they use a lot of scorched earth tactics and concentration camps. You actually see pictures here of the camps that the Boers were locked up in as the British took over and moved in, trying to put down revolts and those kind of things. You also saw a war happen with the local tribes of African populations, the Zulus, the Shona, and Ndebele, who tried fighting against the British with their traditional weapons. So targeting spears and shields versus machine guns. And through much of the superior strength, the Britons ended up winning. And we started seeing this new culture created between the Boers and between the British and stuff in South Africa, where you start seeing the idea of apartheid that comes around. And so you see written by English and also written here in Afrikaans about where we separate black and white and different rules and regulations for each group. And so this idea of apartheid existed to basically create state segregation. This is something that Gandhi, as a very young lawyer, stood up before he went to India and started doing the peace movement there and the separation of Indian movement there. He was a lawyer in South Africa, and he had moved from India to South Africa. Worked as a lawyer, and he was actually, as an Indian, affected by these apartheid laws, where he was told to go to a different railroad car, all those kind of things. And this whole practice stayed in place up through the 1980s. You can see what area the Brit owned here as they went through different areas. So they did hold this big swath right in the middle, but they never got a chance to build their railroad. And they controlled, different ports on different sides of Africa. They had all the gold and diamonds, all this raw material trade was huge for them. And Germany was like, "Oh crap!" I mean, if Britain allowed, a German port in the north, Britain kind of said, they made a deal. So Germany, their said, "Listen, if you, recognize a German port in the North Sea, give us, chance to have that, we'll recognize your trade." And they actually allow that to happen. And that's why you see where Germany gets to have all this land in between the German possessions that are over here as well. And so Germany owned different parts here too, but allowed Britain to have this big swath to make sure they could build their railroad, try to build their railroad in exchange for German areas in Europe. And we have France. So here's France's big chunk. They almost of West Africa here today. And obviously they call it Francophone Africa. Even today they still speak a lot of French in these areas for the official language. But, France actually controlled Algeria for a long time because there were pirates operating in Algeria that attacked French shipping. So, they had controlled the area and they just kind of started adding more and more territory to it. And different raids and takeovers. So in Tunisia, they said that people were raiding to Algeria, so they walked and took that over. Worked over these areas over here. Essentially, they made their own deal with France, basically say that France recognized the Suez Canal, which they helped fund and build, as being a British possession, and then Britain would let them alone to have their areas over here. So we started seeing all these little deals that are being done in the back ways. Germany's kind of the last guy out here. I mean, Germany kind of walks in later and just kind of, if everyone's doing it, I got to do it too kind of situation, where Bismarck made the deal because he organized the conference, so he got to make himself a player in this whole deal. And he organized what were called protectorates. So protectorates were like, you're going to be an independent state, but we're your protector, we're your guide, all that kind of stuff. And so you kind of see, where, Cameroon and Germany, East Africa, and other areas here are going to be the German territories, and have a lot of German business working out of them. This area that you see in Africa, by the way, is 5 times bigger than Germany. There were really big revolts out here in Southwest Africa, which Germany put down with their military force. They get to use their military and try it out, and it resulted in 50,000 dead women, kids, children as they got machine gunned down and hit with artillery. Italy is the last one. And now here's Abyssinia. We talked about this a little bit in our mass politics simulation, where Italy's got to get in the game. And they have Liberia, they have Libya, which is one thing. They got to get more. And so what they do is they try to get this East African seaport on the Red Sea in Eritrea. They have that. They need it at the part of Abyssinia here, Ethiopia. So they actually try to roll in here and take this over. And yeah, they lose bad. I mean, they lose terribly in terms of this war with Ethiopia, and they're beaten back by what they call goat herders with old rifles. And 6,000 Italians are killed in this war they try fighting, and they lose terribly. It is just an embarrassment. But they still control, part of Somalia and those different places. It's not, great. Portugal used to control all these different trading ports. They've been fixed there forever. Ended up controlling very little parts of Africa. I mean, essentially they ran a slave plantation areas in southern Africa. That was really about it. And we're going to talk more in class about what the impact was on culture here and see how it goes for later on too, just to kind of see the outline of who controlled what and what controlled where, so we have that going forward. So thanks for listening, ladies and gentlemen. I really appreciate it as I ramble through this, but you kind of get the gist of what's going on. So thank you very much, and I will talk to you guys later.